The Cotton Bowl is the Devin Brown Show. That's Friday night. This is the podcast daily for Thursday. It's also the Devin Brown Show. That is Bill Landis, Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. And we are one more day away. Ohio State's wrapped up the heavy lifting of the practice week. The offense talked on Wednesday. The days are running together as we get towards the end of the week. And the main event of that, Bill, was Devin Brown. And it was informative, interesting, entertaining session.
Yeah, I mean, what you expect from Devin Brown. He's a charismatic guy, and he remains so here in Dallas. I think he's probably a little tired of answering questions about how charismatic he is and how he has galvanized the team around him and how important his leadership is. But like all those things continue to shine through, both when you talk to him and when you talk to his teammates. I think when you talk to Brian Hartline, you get a good feel for that. I'm sort of more interested in like the player than I am like the intangible stuff now as we get closer to the game. And Devin said that he feels like he's taken some real strides here in the last couple of weeks. And again, I think maybe even more kind of honestly talked about his thought process while he was in the competition with Kyle McCord and probably how he was pressing a little too much and making some mistakes and that limited his consistency, which I think ultimately led to him not winning that job. And he feels more consistent now. And there's, again, a freedom that comes with knowing that the job is yours sort of no matter what. So I think he's taken that opportunity and made the most of it.
Yeah, and I think you listen to Brian Hartline, he sort of reiterated what we've all kind of like posited was happening, that there was a moment in the middle of October when Devin Brown was starting to move that dial a little bit, and then he got hurt and things backtracked. Not obviously because of any fault of his, but I think that there's been a growth going on since the middle of the season with Devin Brown, and the players talk differently about him. I asked Emeka Egbuka, like, is it different? As the wide receiver, is the leadership that much different when there's a vocal guy versus a lead by example guy like Kyle McCord was? And Emeka, being Emeka, said, no, not really. I mean, everyone's the same. Everyone leads different. We have to. But he said, it does feed the whole offense if there's a guy with a little bit of juice. So, I mean, I think that's the nicest way they can say, like, yeah, this feels a little different, but we're not trying to make that big a deal of it until a game is played, because until then, it's all just conjecture.
The one thing, sorry to cut you off, also, the one thing that Devin did say that I thought was interesting, and I think there's a fine line, right, between like knowing what's expected of you, but then also not sort of like changing who you are to try to achieve that. And I think he's done that. But he said, like, as soon as he found out that he was going to be the starter, like it was in the midst of 14 transfers going out of the program, guys trying to figure out NFL stuff, and he felt like things were fractured's the wrong word, because I don't mean it to come off as like Ohio State's program was falling apart, but just sort of like a lot of guys trying to figure stuff out for themselves, and then they knew they had a game to play a couple weeks down the road, and like Devin felt that he had to be the one to like kind of recenter everybody and bring everybody back together once they kind of figured out what they were going to do and whether or not they were going to play, and I think he's done that quite well.
Yeah, and I think all of that is tied up in being yourself. Like we saw this in Berm reference that some of the pregame speech there before the game with Kyle McCord. Like that vocal part did not come naturally to him. We talked about his spring and spiking the football and some of that, and I think he wanted to bring more of that energy, but it wasn't himself. So I don't know if that contributed in any way. Like they were 11-1 and a play away, but it didn't feel like, I don't know,
natural.
The full investment was there, and that's not to re-litigate the battle or criticize Kyle McCord because he's gone or any part of that. He was trying to tap into something that I don't think was ever going to suit him. He could win in that way. I don't know what's going to happen for him at Syracuse or what could have happened at Ohio State next year, but not everybody has to lead in the same way. And if Devin Brown tried to act more like Kyle McCord or not be as outgoing or engaging as he is, I don't think that would ring as true in the Ohio State locker room. So the one thing that was consistently said, whether that was Brian Hartline or Emeka Egbuka or Xavier Johnson or anybody else who talked on Wednesday, was, well, he carries himself the exact same way right now that he did in August. That part is important. It should go without saying, but his on-field play and the way he manages a locker room or communicates with the guys, like that needs to stay the same. You can enhance and become a better version of yourself. Enhance, but I don't know that dramatic changes are necessary, and then we'll see what that means on Friday. We've talked so much about that leadership part, and there's really not going to be any way for us to define that. Like that's why, like I wanted to like know more about his development as a
that's the part
passer.
that has to change. That's the part that needed to change.
Sure.
That's the part that was that's what held him back from being named the starter in August, was what Brian Hartline said repeatedly: consistency. His consistency is getting there. The coaches and the other players don't drop these words on accident. Like it is when the decision gets explained to the staff or to the team, like that's what they hear. This is why we've gone with Kyle. You're talking about Kyle McCord need to be himself, and he maybe sometimes tried to be too much like Devin Brown, and it felt unnatural. For Devin Brown, like as a quarterback, you have to be yourself and do the things that you do and play your game. And sometimes that means playing a little risky. That's who he is. And so now you have to find a way to take that part of your game and put it into the proper context of the offense. Brian Hartline said it on Wednesday. They have to find what Devin does best and do that. So I don't know that they can do that in this game, to be honest, because of the parts of the offense that are missing with Chip Trainum out and Julian Fleming. And, we don't know what Devin does best. I mean, we've seen him throw the deep ball. He does that pretty well. He's a big, powerful runner, but I don't know that this offense is really designed and set up for a lot of QB power on Friday. You want to see him use his feet and get out of the pocket and make some plays with his athleticism. But you also need to be the quarterback who's throwing the ball to guys like Emeka Egbuka and Carnell Tate. So, it's hard to be all those things at once.
We hadn't had a ton of time, after Devin Brown was injured. So in the middle, he talked after the Purdue game and then got hurt against Penn State. And, injured players are not made available to the media. So we hadn't talked to him during that stretch. We've had him a couple times now in December, but still not a ton, for a starting quarterback. He's kind of a relatively blank slate, even for as much as we know about what his personality is and hobbies and that stuff off the field. But to get to know the way he processes and plays the game, it's been pretty limited. I wanted to try and get into some of that with him on Wednesday. Hey, what throws do you like? Because Bill, you broke down all the snaps. Some of the stuff that we've seen in the 15-minute windows feels like, hey, maybe he is better with the deep ball, working outside the hashes. I'm do you have things that you like? The in-breaking routes, stuff like this that you feel more comfortable with. I was what are your favorite throws? And he was touchdowns. So again, it was a Devin Brown. I said, wow, that's a good answer. And then I was but that didn't really, tell me anything. And I think, that was, again, another look at him, but I'm still trying to get an understanding for the way he wants to play the game and how Ohio State will want him to operate on Friday night.
I think that's what makes the game so exciting. I think, and I've kind of come around to that in the last few weeks. I don't really know either. Even going back and watching all 72 of his snaps, I don't think I have a great feel for that. There's definitely stuff on crossers or mesh or whatever where he was throwing the ball behind Emeka Egbuka, sometimes with pressure, sometimes with a clean pocket. He just missed the throw. So
timing.
I think he's got to get better at that stuff. But I think part of that is rhythm, and it's hard to build a rhythm when you're the backup, and even early in the year when it was still a competition, he played 6 plays against Indiana. It wasn't he was getting, or the same workload that Kyle McCord was getting. So I think this month has allowed him to build a little bit more of a rhythm, figure out the timing a little better with guys like Emeka and Carnell Tate and Brendan and Xavier Johnson, all Kate Stover, G. Scott. So I think we'll see an elevated level of play just in terms of being able to make more throws consistently than what we've seen from him. But he can't turn the ball over, and he was asked about that, and he said he feels like he's making better decisions. I think he's kind of come around to the idea that it's okay to cut bait sometimes rather than try to force things over the middle all the time. So, we'll see what it looks like. It's not easy, but I think it's easier to do those things in practice. It's a lot different when you're in an NFL stadium with 60,000 people.
I like hearing
Absolutely.
The descriptions and hints that are dropped when Brian Hartline talks. He sees the game in such an interesting way and describes it pretty clearly. So, it was 2 things when he's diving into some of that consistency, finding the right guy, making the read and going to the right spot is part of it. And then the second part, if you're going to operate at a pretty high level as an Ohio State quarterback and, win a Cotton Bowl or next year take Ohio State to the playoff, it's get it to the right guy, A. And then part B is if it needs to be on the front hip, don't put the ball on the back hip. He was pretty specific about that. It reminded me about, one of those throws to Emeka. And, Kyle missed some of those too. Neither one was ever going to reach the level this year I think that Ryan Day demands. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind about this is no matter what happens on Friday night, not really going to be a reflection of the 2023 Ohio State offense or that the decision was right or wrong or whatever.
He is going to have his safety blanket. I mean, Kate Stover clearly playing. I mean, that helps. Now that will put in the spotlight a little bit what Bill's talking about, like those middle of the field throws. Like, are you able to make those? You got your best receiver out there to do it. You got the security blanket in Stover. I just think that Brian Hartline, the one thing he said about Devin on Wednesday that really kind of caught me, and he wasn't speaking like drilling down individually. He said players always know. The players know. Coaches can think one thing, coaches can say another thing, but the players know who's real, who's not. They believe in Devin Brown. Now, I think that much is clear. The question is, on Friday, has the lack of ability to develop throughout the year, will that stunt him at all? And how much then, for a kid that's super confident, if he does have a little bit of struggle on Friday, how much does that mess with him moving forward? And I think that ultimately will be a pretty important piece of this puzzle. Like I'm with you. Like 3 weeks ago, I think there was a lot of conversation about this game and not really being excited about what was coming for Ohio State. But now you have all these guys playing. You have this opportunity for Devin Brown. You can see the way that the coaches and players talk about him a little bit, and it's got to get a little glint in the eye. And I think that's it's a big moment for him. And I think if there's one takeaway from talking to him, that kid's ready emotionally to do it.
Yeah, he said he was home for a few days in Arizona, and his family kept asking him, like, are you nervous? Are you nervous? And I think his answer was, like, I've been playing tackle football since I was 7 years old. The only difference with this game is that there's going to be 70,000 people in the stands. but I don't really think he gets fazed by much. And the thing that he has that Kyle McCord, I think, it just didn't have the luxury of is you can run Devin a little bit early on and kind of get him into the game. Like, I think you're right, Berm. Like, how they've done it in the past will probably have to look different because of some of the personnel stuff, but they're going to run him, and he expects to run in this game. And I think it's not dissimilar from we saw from JT Barrett in the past. Like, run him a few times, and he kind of finds the speed of the game, and I think it's easier to throw the ball then.
What, both of you guys, when we're a day away now, we know what the opportunity is. We've kind of at times danced around it with how much stock to put in it, breakout game opportunity, how good is it going to look? Here's some of the limitations if you don't have Marvin and Julian Fleming available. Like, can you really hold that against somebody? How much stock is going into just one game? Like, they're playing it. They want to win it. Devin Brown has had several weeks of practice, but this is his first career start. Those things don't always go well. Yeah. It may well. That's not a prediction either way. What's the balance? Like, how much should we put into it?
Let me try to rephrase. Let me restructure that. What makes this game a success for Devin Brown?
Okay.
In your mind?
If he wins?
Yeah, win.
Win, that's all that matters,
Yeah.
win. I mean, I agree. Like, I just want to be clear. Like, to me, that's the bar that he has to clear on Friday night. Like, there's going to be moments when it looks wonky. There's going to be moments when it looks like, oh, wow, look what he can do. But as long as Ohio State has one more point on the board than Missouri when it's over, I think it's a success and something he can build off of. If they lose the game, people, fairly or unfairly, are going to put some of that on Devin Brown, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what it looks like. Right? It could be a bit of a shootout, I think. I think that's on the table with both these offenses. So then, I think there's a world where Devin Brown plays well and Ohio State comes up a point or two short against Missouri. It was a very good offense itself. So I don't know. I think it is as simple as show you have a capability to lead Ohio State into a big game against a very good team and go win the game, whatever it takes. I think that's probably it.
I think that I personally expect this to look more like the last Cotton Bowl Ohio State was in. I'll be gladly wrong to see something a lot more entertaining and offensive-minded than what we were treated to against USC. But because of, I just can't, in my mind, with the layoff, with the number of people that are missing, and not just to go further than Marvin and Julian, to take Chip Trainum out of the equation and a limited backfield, Devin Brown's not going to get a full deck, and I wonder what that means. Like, if Ohio State has to build an offensive game plan to get somebody through a first career start, which again is not easy for anybody to go out there and just do it against a good team in a situation that is, new, neutral site and all this other stuff, and without, the benefit of a ton of experience. Like, if they control the clock and if Devin Brown uses his legs to do some of the things that you guys are talking about, like, cool. I mean, if Ohio State gets to 24 points in this game, I would say that that's probably a reasonable amount and enough for them to win with a defense that's going to be pretty close to fully stocked. So,
that's where, to me, like, it comes down to, what does Ryan Day want out of this? They obviously want to win this game, but is the goal to see what Devin Brown can do, or is the goal to win this game? Because I don't think that those two things are necessarily parallel. I think you can put Devin in some uncomfortable situations and use this as a live scrimmage, like any exhibition game is, and that they are exhibition games, even though they count. Like, so what do you want out of this? And I think that's something that Ryan Day probably has to figure out, or has been figuring out over these last few weeks. I know Devin Brown wants to win. He was asked straight up, like, does it bother you that people think Missouri cares about this game more than Ohio State? And he said, well, we care about this game. Like, it's a top 10 matchup, New Year's Six bowl game. Like, it's one of the 10 biggest games of the year. So how can you not care? But the coaches have a different responsibility, and that is, now we have to prepare for next year. I think you let Devin Brown come out and let it rip. I agree. That's the way I view it. I don't think you do him any favors by coming out and putting the offense in a conservative mindset. You've got Travion Henderson there. You've got Emeka Egbuka. You've got Carnell Tate.
You've got next year's offense, basically. Minus like two guys.
Yeah, come out and let it rip, and give the kid an opportunity to have the full deployment of the weapons and see what he can do with it then. Because I think the worst thing for Ohio State coming out of this game is having more questions about your quarterback position than you have coming into it.
I guess
maybe your point. Maybe that ends up being a 24 to 17 game because of turnovers or an interception here there.
Yeah, letting it rip could backfire.
Yeah, I'm well aware it could backfire.
I think that should be their demeanor too. Like Brian Hartline, their words, right? I don't know. He said we're going to go let it rip on Friday, like 3 or 4 times during his press conference. Now, is that just him finding a turn of phrase that he liked on a Wednesday, or is that actually how their mentality going into this game? I don't know, but I hope that is their default, because it's not like they're missing guys, right? But it's not like they're playing with a bunch of walk-ons. They're playing with guys who are expected to contribute for this team soon, next year. So, like, why not see what this whole thing looks like and go out there and run your offense? And I don't know, if it doesn't go your way, at least you didn't turtle and play conservatively.
I think part of my curiosity or uncertainty about that is, again, we're operating off of 71 snaps, but
72.
Sorry, I threw one out. It didn't count. Is that when we're talking about running the Ohio State offense, it was like a completely different one. They were calling it so differently when Devin Brown would go in the game compared to Kyle McCord. And I understand why. There's a more willingness to let him use his legs than there ever was going to be for Kyle McCord. But, like, just going out and running quarterback power and misdirection and the design sweep stuff, that doesn't suit Ohio State's offense in my mind. Like, letting it rip would be letting him
freelance.
I
think it looks a lot like what, and I'm not saying they're the same player. I think it looks a lot like what they did with Justin Fields early on in 2019. Yeah, let him run a little bit, let him throw the ball down the field.
But also let him let's roll out. Let's get him throwing on the run. The scripted, easy to predict, everyone knows it's coming, QB power stuff is not going to work no matter what.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, if that's the stuff that was being installed for Devin Brown.
Well, it might work on first down.
It might work in the red zone. It might work
when you're throwing him out there and it's 3rd and 3, like we all know what's coming, but it's 1st and 10 you want to run.
Let's give him a chance to do the things that he's capable of doing. And you only get to that point by coaching this game without fear. And they have nothing to fear in this game but fear itself.
Ooh. Wow. You just came up with that?
Yeah.
Let's write that down.
Wow.
Brilliant.
It's so poetic.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. I get your point. I really do. But, like, they've had him playing an offense that isn't what they want him to do now. So how do you decide which way to go? I figure you just open it up and say, go do your thing.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. That's the part where going into Friday night, it's like, I really don't know what it's going to look like. I'd like to have a better idea. That's part of the fun or the intrigue now at this point with the game so close. But, I mean, that's who we're all going to be watching. It's so important, and it's remarkable. If he's telling the truth that he's not nervous at all, he knows what's at stake here. And, this is not just about winning the Cotton Bowl, but it is setting the table for 2024. It is removing any need for a conversation about the transfer portal or anything else like that. That's all wrapped up in this one game. That's what I was saying earlier. think it's fair to evaluate him off of a 1-game sample size in his first start against the top 10 team. But, the flip side of that is that he can make the most of it, and it all goes, we don't even have to talk about it anymore.
Dwayne Haskins was given a job for 1 quarter of football in Ann Arbor, right? I'm not saying that if Devin Brown plays poorly, Ohio State should say everything's wide open. We're throwing it all back. But I am saying if he goes out there and lights the world on fire, he can walk out of this game thinking, I know what's next.
Yeah.
And he was asked, like, are you using this as a tryout? He said, I'm looking at it as like I'm the starting quarterback at Ohio State, and that's all. Like, he doesn't want to turn it into something bigger than that. And I think that's smart on his part, because the minute you do that, those 70,000 eyes that are watching you become much heavier. And he's been able to stay relatively light through this process. And I think that's the way he has to approach it. But for fans, for media, for the coaching staff, if it doesn't look 1,000% right, like, that's okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's okay. I expect some ups and downs. He probably will turn the ball over in this game. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. It'll be an interesting question, I think, for Ryan Day, who we talk to later on Thursday. Like, and maybe he won't answer it, but is the impulse to, like, quote unquote protect the quarterback in this kind of situation, or understand that, like, the stakes aren't really that high, it's sort of a unique situation, kind of throw him to the wolves and see what happens, and let him run. Maybe that's the wrong way to put it, but, like, just let him go out there and run the thing, and, like,
are you protecting your quarterback, or are you preparing for the future? Because I don't think you can do both.
No, neither do I. Yeah.
We'll find out soon enough. We are going to hear from Ryan Day later on. As Bill said, we'll be back at AT&T Stadium for some more snap judgments after we hear from Ryan Day. The last media availability before the Cotton Bowl Friday night against Missouri for the Buckeyes. Devin Brown's first career start, and broken it down right here on the podcast daily with these guys, Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. We'll talk to you later. See ya.